Nonetheless, that would be one hell of a firewall, and it would be as real as day, whereas every day the sun is shining off of all the space trash, and if someone was trying to hack, they would have to know every piece of trash, and that's how strong it could be. Whereas that trash is real, and the best firewall should be too. Here's a new one. How accurate is particular? Well, when it comes to bandwidth, I'm something of a stickler, where I like to know what's the best of the best and the cream of the crop. Something as intuitive as space junk, it needs to be taken into consideration because that's where all the satellites are, the most expensive ones. All the space junk that's going around planet Earth is nothing short of a loose screw because that's how it got there. All these expensive satellites and all these engineerings of the satellites of the engineer astronauts have thrown all their waste aside. And their waste aside becomes somewhat of homing devices, and so this makes a vacuum ostensibly for what would be contained as a swamp spy grid. And a swamp spy grid is nothing short of a vacuum, where if you were to take each bubble of foam behind me and have that be its own satellite, I would like to know in the future, if there was this many satellites, what would be the bandwidth of the particular magnetic field around the Earth, given it have all the trash induced from being conductive surfaces of the satellite radiation in a collective. It's just the overuse of non-importance. And in IT, when you're typing in your password, it comes up into little stars that make everything hidden after a split second after you enter in a character. Or if you're trying to receive your password, not only will it be temporary and not important, but it will be new because the thing that you had is lost. So when you're entering in a new thing, here's the nuance. You're not going to be able to get it right initially because it's not intuitive. And so the fact that it's being hidden with little stars, it's like an option where, are you really scared that someone next to you is going to be looking at your screen? More often than not, that's not. There's always a plan B. And sometimes people can't figure that out and they took the easiest way out. Where cover up ducks. And so when the key feat for having the angle of repose, the angle of incline, the angle of decline, wow, that's 3 degrees of freedom needs to be taken into consideration upon any gain in advance. And a gain in advance is nothing short of a second path, plan B. There's always 2 ways to do a thing. And so when you're contacting to the IT department, you gotta make sure you know that the route of access, the initial one, is sometimes slower. If a system is better than theirs, then they'll tell you to use the other one because you'll be able to have it go through quicker, even though it's not the first thing that comes to mind when you're associating the problem is getting through them first. Sometimes it's just the other end location, point B, where it needs to be considered the trajectory from going to A to B is longer than just calling up B and dialing it in and meeting point A from your point of view of point A and point B. You be achieving the distance from A to B just by having B be hit first and deducing from both from that path. Very unintuitive, but simply is reason for always having the plan B. And so like if I just so accurately throw this and it lands perfectly in my proper destination, that would be one way of getting it there without me having to carry it. Because as much as I like carrying stuff that are light, where I don't have to use my entire arms like shovels, carrying something just in lightly or in my pocket is equally as bad because it gets annoying. It's just the potentials. There's wind everywhere, and that's, the potential they took advantage of, making it a vacuum. Why wouldn't I think of that? Just as so anything can spontaneously combust if dehydrated enough, the area right over my left shoulder was caught fire once, and I think that's what happened. Just one more sign. I bet it says free. I bet, yeah. Well, now we've got a different allocation where you need a licensure or to take out a permit to make sure you can do stuff. And so that's when a whole different can of worms is opened, and it's no different than a open source, where if you're open sourcing, you probably need a permit, and that's not even that bad, but it's when you can't get criticized or else you're told that you're being hateful. And so I guess a great example that pops into mind once is how Superman, they always relate Superman to Jesus, so I'm gonna do it one time. And we're Superman, they always relate Superman for for Jesus, so I'm gonna do it this one time because you can't kill either of them. But when Superman did, he cataloged all of these superheroes, rounded them up, was about to kill all of them, and then he was just having a hissy fit. His girlfriend came in to save the day. And so if you were one of those superheroes, you're gonna think, wow, this a-hole just had a hissy fit, and it was all over his girlfriend. And so then of course he grabs her and flies off, so he was about that close from ending all of their lives. And why is that important is when his ability to do that amount of damage, but then he never does, except for that one instance, speaks volumes. This is why my fascination of ghosts, how in movies, and I think in real life, they can mimic sounds of a person who's passed really, really accurately. And why that's scary is that everyone's vocal cords has a specific simile of tension and what have you to make the surface area unique. And a ghost would essentially have the information of how to mimic that surface area and be able to do that through wind inside of a room. I've felt an odd occurrence of a backdraft that was one hell of one, because I felt like I was sitting inside of a music box being turned, and the thing cranking in the turn were my eardrums. Yeah, I felt the channel focused of the wind shooting into my eardrums off the specifically in the corner right behind me in the room, and it was like a voice of a human, but it wasn't coming out of a diaphragm. And that's how I know ghosts can articulate the same thing as a music box would, just with the tiny like dot metals in a reel. They use the entire room and your eardrum in synchronicity of the cranking of a music box hitting the different pins and making the glockenspiel xylophone dings. But instead of it dinging, it's the sound of a person's voice, like without it sounding robotic at all, and just purely like a human voice. And then keeping the things that are like important, like if you have to show evidence of something, and then you wouldn't have it until if it were at your disposal. And I'm an advocate of signs as well, and so whenever there's signs, like, I take it kind of literal. Whereas, like, second advocate of glass on the ground because I stepped on one and had to get stitches, worst feeling of my life. And so I would want to break stuff on the ground because that's fun, but that's would just make more glass shatter. We're in security cameras. Huge deficit in the security sector. They made a joke and it's on the ground, tattered and looking like a jug of that stuff. I'd like to take a moment to thank Home